I can like present today. So it's up to your questions. Do you have questions? Okay, let me come back. Okay, there's a question. Can we distinguish these societies through time or maybe place? Sovereignty seems like past, but I can't distinguish well disciplinary and control. Yes, we can distinguish these societies through time. We discussed about that. Societies of sovereignty like represents this pre-modern era, before 19th century, before this emergence of modern thinking. We have societies of sovereignty, the sovereign I as the basic unit of surveillance systems. The sovereign on the one hand and the subjects on the other, but that sovereign is not omnipresent entity that can supervise the actions of its subjects. Whereas we have disciplinary societies with the rise of these institutional kind of surveillance logic. We started to see, for example, schools, as we discussed, factories, hospitals, right, prisons, we talked, and this is something actually coming from this modern kind of thinking in the 19th century. And societies of control is entirely unique to our contemporary age. We're not limited to those enclosed spaces now, right? We're always, every time, even in our private sphere, we're under specific supervision, under surveillance, through cameras, through like cell phones, social media. I mean, many different technologies actually work for this omnipresent surveillance, which is something very different from disciplinary societies. And this panopticon logic is very important also here. Do you remember this panopticism that I mentioned and also we discussed when we like thought about this panopticon style of prisons? Do you remember that tower? Let me share the screen again. Okay, we talked about this image, the tower here. There is an enclosed space. Of course, the above floor of this prison is like open, but it's an open air prison. But let's think, let's consider it as this closed, enclosed space. And we have at the center this tower, and we have this like circular kind of architecture here. And we discussed about the role of this tower and the role of this person here, the security staff watching the actions of all prisoners here. And we talked about how actually that person's presence lead to a kind of not self-surveillance, but I mean, okay, we discussed, do you remember we discussed if there is no one here at the top of the tower, what happens? It changed the whole story, right? If we make, for example, here, like a black screen by which actually the prisoners can't see whether there is someone or not at the top of this tower, then this leads to self-surveillance. That's the idea of self-surveillance, because you don't know actually whether there is someone there, and you don't know whether you can be punished by your like dissident actions, let's say. So you try to, you start to like supervise your own actions. We also like gave the example from this, the radars in Eskişehir Road. You don't know whether you're like, you don't know whether you're, if you exceed the speed limit, you don't know whether you're punished or not, but still actually you slow down when you see that radar. So that's also the situation for cameras in general. So self-surveillance is a kind of method actually appeared in disciplinary societies, and it became the norm also of our societies of control, the contemporary age. because of this omnipresence of cameras. This tower here today acts like a camera in our contemporary society. It's omnipresent, ubiquitous mechanism of surveillance of people. And the interesting thing about societies of control, we actually don't know who actually supervise our actions, which is something very different from disciplinary societies. In disciplinary societies, for example, if you're a prisoner, then the security staff, let's say the manager of the prison, or in the case of hospitals, there is this doctor-patient relationship. In the schools, there is this teacher and student relationship. So the actors were specific in disciplinary societies. But today, we're using our cell phones, for example, but we don't know actually who supervise our actions. So the nature of self-surveillance also changed a lot. That's also another difference between disciplinary societies and societies of control in the context of this panopticism and self-surveillance. That can also be something that you can mention if I ask such a question in the final exam. Is it clear? Is there any other question about this disciplinary societies, societies of control, societies of sovereignty? If there is no question, I will answer the next question. I couldn't remember what panopticon is. That's what I'm explaining. Panopticon is the name of this kind of architectural design. And the cameras today are using the same panopticon style of surveillance logic. You can check what panopticon is. If you Google panopticon, then you can find numerous different information and interpretation of different scholars. Okay, you can check panopticon and you can understand what panopticon is. Anything else about this surveillance technologies? You can ask in person, just don't write in the chat box. Okay, no question. Another question, Laplace demon's connection with cybernetics. Okay, that's not that important. The connection of Laplace demon with cybernetics, I used Laplace demon in order to show you that in Laplace demon, you have to know this individual motions and movements of atoms in order to predict what the future is like. Okay, so I used that argument in order to show you the difference between this part versus whole argument. What is the use of approaching things by using this logic of whole instead of parts in order to predict what the future is like? It is something different from Laplace demon. Do you remember the example that I gave in the class about this Gustave Le Bon's theory of crowd psychology? It was something different from individual psychology. So basically, he says that in order to understand the crowd psychology, you should consider the crowd as the crowd, not like the sum of the individuals in that crowd. If you look at individual psychologies separately, and if you sum all of these individual psychologies in order to understand crowd psychology, then you can't understand what crowd psychology in fact is, he says. So you have to understand crowd psychology as something different from the sum of those individual psychologies. So that's something important in order to understand this paradigm shift about approaching things around us. Also, you can remember the example that I gave about, I for example, drew a circle. Do you remember that? So how can we define this circle? Is it the sum of the dots? That's one explanation. There are like several dots on a circle. And you can say that, okay, in order to have this circle, we have to sum all the dots on it. That's one explanation. So the other explanation, similar to this crowd psychology, individual psychology analogy, is that the circle is a circle as a whole. It's something different from sum of the dots. So the idea about cybernetics also is this paradigm the cyberneticians have about this wholeness, the concept of wholeness. We have to look at things as systems, as wholes, not as parts. So also you can remember the idea of black box. We have to treat things as black boxes. Because if you open the black box, then it's very complex, right? You cannot reduce the complexity of a system if you open that system. So let's assume that, that's the idea of, okay, let me open that PowerPoint slide also. Okay, we have this like black box discussion. So the idea of black box, as we discussed, originated in this electrical engineering, etc., etc. So the idea of it actually is it's not necessary to enter the black box to understand the nature of what is it? Nature of the function it performs. So it is more important to grasp what things do than to understand fully how they work. So they say that don't open the black box. You can think of, for example, economics as a kind of black box. But if you know, like in this one, this feedback and self-regulation in a system, if you know when you provide some input to the system and if you get a specific output, then that's the whole thing, okay? That's something necessary for our purposes. It's not necessary to know how the system actually functions, what is inside the system. It's not important, it's not necessary, because when I give this input to this system, then I get this output. So why should I actually open the black box? Why should I open, for example, this self-regulating economic system? It's not necessary, they say. And they try to like predict the future of different social systems interacting with each other by using this input, output, and feedback system, self-regulation, used by different systems engaging with each other. This is also the whole idea about like predicting the future of social life, social and political life. And the most, like the easiest way of doing that is considering systems as black boxes. It reduces complexity, so you can deal with that complexity. So think about social systems. They're very complex. They are open systems. It's not like you're in a laboratory, right? There's several different, not several, but numerous agents in society. So you cannot control all of them. So they think that, okay, what should we do in order to solve this problem? And they say that, okay, we have to look at the social and political life from this perspective of whole systems. It will help us a lot. That's the idea of this political project. I will not ask a specific question, by the way, about this cyber political project in Chile. Okay, this is only about like, okay, there is some theory, we have cybernetics theory, and it is used in practice in history. But you have to know the idea of black box, the idea of cybernetics in general, and this feedback and self-regulation in a system. So what's its use actually? That's the important thing about this week. And of course, this paradigm shift from part to whole. Okay? What about understanding the present, not with its individual components, but with systems interacting with each other to predict the future? This is the question that cyberneticians answered at that time. And they say that, okay, we can understand systems as systems, not with its individual components. Is it clear? Do you have any question about the Cybernetics Week? How do we control the system if we don't know the system works implicitly? Is there anyone that wants to answer this question? Answering such questions is good to like internalize the knowledge you have. Because that's what I like try to explain in the idea of black box and this feedback and self-regulation in a system. Is there anyone that wants to answer this question? You give an okay, Aslan, you can also tell us like by using your voice rather than your fingers.
Hojam, essentially, like it's not necessary to know the exact characteristics of the system. So, for example, your smartphone, you know that if you press here, you will open this app, but you don't know what the exact circuitry inside is, what the display is like. So you don't have to know. You just give an input, you observe the output, and that's how you learn that this is what the system is capable of. So
that's also the case.
That's essentially it.
Yeah, I mean that also we also gave the example of our bodies, right? We eat something every day, but we don't know what our organs, for example, do. But we still know the fact that if we eat something, then we can survive. And if we don't eat, if we don't drink water, for example, we can't survive. So our body actually for us is a closed black box. For a doctor, it can be not a black box, right? He can or she can open that black box of the body. But for us, that's why this is all about perspective, actually. It's not something that things are not in nature black boxes. You can see everything from the perspective of black box, or you can like look at things from a different perspective. You can open the black box also. We also gave the example, if you remember, this classroom. So the classroom can be observed as a black box because every week in the semester, for example, you come to the class, I come to the class, I gave a lecture, you participated in discussions, you asked questions, I asked questions, and we go home. So it's not necessary actually for an external observer to know what's going on inside the class. He or she will know the fact that, okay, these students entered the class and they will get a lecture and they will go home at the end of like 2 hours. So the class, for the perspective of that external observer, is a black box. But for me, for example, as the instructor of that course, or for you as the students of that course, it's not a black box. You know actually what's going on in that specific class at that specific time. That's why it is about perspective. And these people, these cyberneticians, try to think everything like a system, closed black box system. Don't open it. If we open it, then it makes everything very complicated. So we can't predict the future of this political, social issues. Did that answer your question? Okay. Anyone that wants to ask something about this or any other things? Okay. If the system works properly, we can understand from getting into the black box. But if there's a problem with the system, shouldn't the problem be handled from the inside of the system? Of course. So the whole idea actually is this self-regulation, providing, like achieving this self-regulation in a system like our body. Of course, our bodies also like give some alarms, right? For example, if you eat so much unhealthy food, at some point, probably you will have this alarming situation in your body. So you have to, for example, change your habits. You have to go to the hospital maybe, and you should actually deal with the problem in order to solve it. But in our like daily life, this body is a self-regulating system. When it gives some alarm, when it gives some error, then you can fix it, of course. But if you can't actually reach this self-regulation in a system, then you like if you open the black box, you probably find numerous problems in your body, but it actually regulates itself every day in our everyday life. And cyberneticians' project was creating social systems regulating themselves without the necessity of external intervention all the time. But the question you ask is a valid question. So if there is a problem, then someone should intervene in the situation and fix the problem, of course. But that's not this everyday reality, they say. Okay, good. Anything else that you want to ask? Think about the questions that I asked, that like critical questions, critical discussions we made in almost all of the weeks. They're important and they show like your critical thinking about the material. I want to see those critical approach that you can provide to the questions that I ask in the final exam. So let's just look at, of course, many of them also, like you can find different questions in different parts of our PowerPoint slides. So like check them, discuss them. You can also discuss those questions with your friends. That's also a very good way of like knowing what's the issue in those questions. That's a good way of, or you can like write your opinions about those questions. That's something also important. But again, of course, you have to know the basics. You have to know what black box is. What's the idea of this whole against parts in order to answer a question from this cybernetics week. Anything else? If you don't have any question, I don't have anything to tell you.
Hujam, I have a question about the latest topic that we covered related to how our attitudes towards death have evolved over the last few centuries, and how these ideas can be like applied to understand contemporary approaches to, like, for example, end of life care and palliative medicine. So I remember in class we discussed about Malthusian ideas, utilitarianism, and like how in this capitalist society it's become more imperative to the governments that every person of society is a functioning member of society that contributes to it as well, unlike the previous case where people were mostly living on subsistence farming and all of that stuff. But we never really discussed these ideas of like end of life care and palliative medicine. We discussed how we have become more obsessed with our health, or how you assume so, but like we have these technologies that make it possible, for example, to for people who are terminally ill, if there is this possibility of having carrying out assisted suicides, which is a major topic. So anything like that that can be
Like
discussed.
euthanasia, for example.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, euthanasia. Yes.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
these topics, we never really brought up these topics, and I was wondering why. Like I thought these would be the most important topics in this regard, because now we have the technology or perhaps the means to carry them out. But because of our obsession with youth, perhaps it is more feasible or less feasible, or perhaps how our morals have changed over the last few centuries.
Okay,
So all of
that can
stuff.
be that can be a question I can ask actually. Okay, so like, and this is open to your like critical thinking. That's why I'm emphasizing the necessity of using critical thinking. I mean, just consider the impact of contemporary technologies on what we discussed about death and life. We discussed about the situation in pre-modern times, the idea of that, tamed that. We also discussed about this forbidden that. And in one of the sections, someone asked, how can we, I mean, similar to your question actually, how can we understand these two concepts considering contemporary technologies? Is it, I mean, and the question also is like, is, for example, the idea of taint that something relevant to our contemporary discussions about death and life?
Yes, exactly. That's more or less my.
Yeah, I mean, you can think about that. This is not like a question that, I mean, I cannot provide a definite answer to this question, but it's open to your like analysis of these terms. And you know all these contemporary technologies, so you can use this interpretive skills in the exam. Okay, you can use your critical thinking, you can use your sophisticated vision, maybe. So analyze, for if I ask such a question, analyze the technologies, contemporary technologies, and their meaning, for example, for the concepts of taint that and forbidden that. What is the relevance of these concepts today? Is that still forbidden, for example? Or is the idea of taint that something very relevant today because of contemporary technologies? This is a discussion topic that you can discuss with your friends. I will not give you like some proper answer to this question, but that's a good question, and that can be, of course, also a part of one of your questions. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Another question, can you explain the part where we consider the recommendation systems as democratic technology and AI chatbot as authoritarian technology? Okay, what's your answer? Do you remember the discussion? You, like many students participated in this discussion. Democratic versus authoritarian technologies, chatbots versus recommendation systems. They have different logics, right? Chatbots use a different logic. Recommendation systems are using a different logic. So we, in a way, actually approach this question. I mean, we said that we can understand recommendation systems as democratic. I mean, the idea of, I mean, it's a democratic technology because it recommends. It's not like it doesn't give you some proper information, language-based, proper, okay, this is the correct information and you can trust it. It's not a kind of thing in recommendation system. So you have a bunch of different alternatives and it says, okay, you can choose some, in the case of Spotify, for example, you can pick some songs and you can listen to them. It's up to you. I just recommend and I just help you to like extend your taste, your musical taste in the scope of Spotify. Whereas chatbots have a different story, right? You have the structured questions and you get a structured answer. That's also the difference between chatbots and Google. There was a presentation in one of the sections. Can chatbots actually be can chatbots replace search engines, or can ChatGPT replace Google? That's also like touching on the same issues. If you like provide some proper information to users, then it's not that democratic. I mean, it's in a way, of course, not entirely, but in a way, eliminates this democratic aspect of information. You can search, for example, by using Google, you can put some keywords, right? And you can use your search bar and you can like have some information from different websites. For example, if you believe in flat earth, then you can find, for example, some arguments about those supporters of flat earth against this scientist kind of thinking. But chatbot will provide you some specific answer, which makes it more authoritarian technology. This is, by the way, it's not a topic discussed in the literature, to my knowledge, as far as I know. There is no such separation. That's why I put this question at the end of our PowerPoint slides, at the end of our class discussions. This can be something actually relevant and worth to be discussed. So you can think of recommendation systems and chatbots within the context of authoritarianism versus democracy. Is it relevant? I don't know. It seems to me relevant to make such a discussion, but it's like, again, up to your critical approach, critical thinking. If you can find some links between authoritarianism and chatbots, democracy and recommendation systems, then you can focus on that. If you can't find, then you should also say that, okay, I can't find any like relevance to authoritarian technology by chatbots or the opposite side recommendations systems to democracies, the idea of democracy in general, then you should show that. I mean, why is it not the case? Is it clear? Okay, any other question?
Yes, Hojam. Why must we be bounded by these two political leadership types? Like a chatbot can also be laissez-faire if it's not lobotomized and censored. Like there are these new chatbots coming out where people have essentially removed all censorship behind it. So it can take its own course. You can train it by yourself and let it be whatever you want. So it's a more laissez-faire type of political leadership, as compared to authoritarianism or democratic. So can we consider something like that as well for the final exam?
Of course. I mean, if it's your interpretation, then that's good. Just interpret the question. If I ask such a question, I don't have, again, a clear answer to this question. I mean, just ensure about this idea. I give you some like this foundational concepts, foundational discussions, and I mean, on the top of such discussions, it's actually up to your critical thinking. It's up to your like sophisticated approach. That's something important. Don't give me just the concepts, and don't give me also like only the critical approach that you can give in the exams. Just combine them. Provide me what I taught actually, okay? What I showed you from an academic perspective, and put your critical skills onto that discussion, okay? The explanation of the course material. So if I ask democratic technology and authoritarian technology, this is not, of course, I can't ask only like, okay, chatbots are authoritarian and recommendation systems are democratic. I mean, it can be a part of the question again, but if I ask such a question, just, I mean, that's the logic I have, okay? Provide the information, then interpret or like bring your critical evaluation, assessment of the question, okay? That's the important thing. So what you said is, I think, relevant, and you can use that idea. in your answer in such a situation. So the final exam is more open-ended, and knowing the definitions themselves will be more or less frivolous. Yes, yani, of course, it's not like it was also open-ended in a sense in our midterm exam. Actually,
But-
I expected that also in the midterm, but I'm expecting more critical thinking in your final exam. Okay, I mean, that's how we can put this here.
I understand that, Hojam, but for example, in the last question of the midterm, there were a lot of these terminologies.
Uh-huh.
So
You have to use those terminologies again. If I
Okay.
ask again social construction of technology, for example, you can use those terminology. If I ask, for example, something about racism, you can use some terminology that we discussed in the class. Then bring your critical approach. Okay?
Yes, Hojam.
Any other question? Just learn the concepts and think about them. Discuss those concepts, discuss those questions. If you discuss, then I think if you understand what that meant in the past and what that meant in the 20th century and what can be its relevance, those concepts, relationship with our current status in our contemporary society. If you think about those kinds of questions before the exam, then I think it's enough to answer the questions. This is not like exam that I expect from you, like this equations, right? There is no definite answer to these questions. But this doesn't mean that you can free flow share your ideas. You have to provide some essential information that we discussed. And you can find all of them in your class notes, also in PowerPoint slides. I almost like shared all of them in our PowerPoint files.
Hojam, may I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you expect us to use the topics before midterm exam? Like, how can we use?
What
I didn't get. So you said that it's like a comprehensive exam.
It's what?
Comprehensive exam, you said, right?
Comprehensive exam?
Like there are
Yeah, I mean, it will
topics.
include all the topics. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So here's the question. So how do you expect us to use these topics in the final? How can we use Scott in I don't know, like surveillance topic?
I don't know. You will tell me in the
How do
exam.
you know? Yeah, okay, I get it.
I mean, you all did your projects, right? You all used those different theories with different technologies, so it's up to your like understanding of those theories and using them in practical life for practical technologies or practical questions.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Anything else? In the reading you assigned for societies of control, there is this term called individuals. Where is that term? Societies of,
Deleuze's text.
in societies of control.
Yes.
Actually, we did not discuss about individuals, so you're not actually responsible for that term.
Yeah, but like in the midterm, we were responsible for the essential readings, and I think this term comes from the essential readings.
Okay, you're right, but I mean, you will not be responsible. I mean, okay, let's also make this clear. You're responsible from readings, but it's not necessary to know all the concepts in the readings because we have not actually covered all of them. So, okay, I mean, if you like search for example, what individuals mean compared to individuals. And if you like, if it is relevant to the question that I will ask in the final exam, then you can like expand your answer by including, for example, the definition of individuals and like showing the relationship between the question and this concept. But it's not necessary. I will not expect to know all those different concepts in essential readings. Do the readings in order to have some like, let's say, sophisticated discussion of the material again.
Tamam hocam. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I think you will all do that in a very good way. I'm sure about that. That's not a difficult exam, just like the first one. The first one, I think, also was quite good on the one hand, but also an easy one. And this one is also an easy one, in my opinion. So you can do that, but just like get know the concepts, get know the discussions, and discuss the material. I recommend with your friends taking this course. Also with your friends who are not taking this course, it can also be beneficial, but it would be good for you to discuss the material with your friends. Okay, if you don't have any more questions, this can be enough, I think. Any more questions? Last 10 seconds. Okay. Okay, good. I mean, if you have this like the most serious question about the final exam, then you can ask that question by email. You can send me an email before the exam. Okay. For the most serious ones, don't like send me emails including like questions that you asked here. Okay. Okay. So see you on Saturday. Okay.
Teşekkür ederiz hocam.
You're welcome, all of you. I thank you again for all your participation in the class. Okay, throughout the semester. Thank you for coming to the class, taking this course. I'm very happy to like teaching something to you in the entire semester. It was a very good experience also to me. So let's see you on Saturday.
Thank you hocam.
Okay. Görüşürüz. Goodbye.
Görüşmek üzere hocam.